Moses and the burning bush, when God speaks from fire, a reluctant shepherd, a holy flame, and a divine call. The desert was quiet, just wind, sand, and the slow rhythm of sheep hooves on rock. For Moses, this had become life. Gone were the days of Egyptian luxury, of palace walls and royal influence. Now, at 80 years old, he was a shepherd in Midian, watching over flocks that were not even his own. But on one otherwise unremarkable day, everything changed. A flame that did not burn out, Moses led the sheep to Horeb, the mountain of God. As he scanned the horizon, something caught his eye, a bush on fire, glowing with orange flame. But it didn't crackle, didn't blacken. It wasn't consumed. Curious, Moses drew closer. And then came the voice, "Moses, Moses." Exodus 3-4, he froze. "Here I am," he replied. Then the command, "Do not come any closer. Take off your sandals, for the place where you're standing is holy ground." This was no ordinary fire. This was God's presence, holy, burning, alive. "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." Moses hid his face, afraid to look, a mission revealed. God told Moses he had seen the suffering of his people in Egypt, heard their cries, and was ready to act. "So now, go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt." Exodus 3:10, the call was clear, the mission enormous. But Moses didn't leap into action. He hesitated, just as many of us might. Excuses and questions. Moses began to protest. 1. Who am I? Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? God responded not with a list of Moses' qualifications, but with this, "I will be with you." Moses' identity didn't matter as much as God's presence. 2. What if they ask who sent me? God answered, "I am who I am, ... Tell them, I am has sent me to you." A name full of mystery and eternity. Yahweh, the self-existent 1-3. What if they don't believe me? God gave Moses signs, a staff that turned into a snake, a hand that became leprous and then healed, water from the Nile that would turn to blood. These were not magic tricks, they were proofs of divine authority. 4. I am not eloquent. Moses worried about his speech. "I am slow of speech and tongue." God replied, "Who gave human beings their mouths? Now go. I will help you speak and will teach you what to say." 5. Please send someone else. Finally, Moses simply begged to be let off the hook. God became angry, but merciful. He allowed Moses' brother Aaron to go with him and speak on his behalf. The call confirmed. God did not back down. Moses, reluctant and flawed, was still God's chosen vessel. He left the mountain changed not in power, but in purpose. The same staff he used to guide sheep would soon be raised before Pharaoh. The same voice that trembled with doubt would soon declare, "Let my people go." Themes that burn like the bush. 1. Calling. God doesn't always call the equipped, he equips the called. Moses was in hiding, a fugitive, a shepherd, but God saw more. 2. Faith and reluctance. Moses doubted himself repeatedly, but God's answers were always rooted in who he is, not who Moses was. The journey of faith often begins with trembling steps. 3. God's presence. The fire in the bush did not consume it, just as God's call would not destroy Moses. Instead, his presence would sustain him, God's repeated promise, "I will be with you." Conclusion, when God calls from the fire. The story of Moses and the burning bush reminds us that the ordinary becomes holy when God steps in. A mountain becomes sacred ground, a stick becomes a staff of miracles. A fugitive becomes a liberator. God still calls, sometimes in quiet whispers, sometimes in blazing flames, and when he does, the only right answer is Moses' first one, "Here I am." The Exodus and Passover, from chains to freedom. A night of blood, a sea of deliverance, and a God who redeems. For centuries, the people of Israel lived as slaves in Egypt, crushed under the weight of forced labor, their cries rising like incense to heaven. Pharaoh's heart was hard, his grip unyielding. But the God of their fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, had not forgotten. He raised up Moses, a reluctant prophet, to confront Egypt's king with a simple, unrelenting command: "Let my people go." What followed was a clash not just between Pharaoh and Moses, but between Pharaoh's false gods and the Lord of heaven and earth, the final plague and the first Passover. Plague after plague had shaken Egypt water to blood, hail, locusts, darkness, but Pharaoh remained stubborn. At last, God declared one final act of judgment, the death of every firstborn in Egypt, but Israel would be spared. God gave precise instructions through Moses. Each household was to select a lamb without blemish. At twilight, they were to slaughter the lamb and smear its blood on the doorframes of their homes. Inside, they would roast the lamb, eat it with unleavened bread and bitter herbs, and be ready to leave at a moment's notice, staff in hand, sandals on feet. That night, the Lord would pass through Egypt. Wherever he saw the blood, he would pass over that house, sparing its firstborn. And so it happened. At midnight, a great cry rose from Egypt, every house struck by death, except those sheltered by the blood. Pharaoh, broken at last, summoned Moses and Aaron. "Up, leave my people, you and the Israelites. Go, worship the Lord as you have requested." Israel left in haste, carrying unleavened dough, flocks, and the wealth of Egypt given by their former masters. The Exodus had begun. The pursuit in the sea, but Pharaoh's pride returned. As Israel marched out, he gathered his chariots, the finest in Egypt, and pursued them. Trapped between the Red Sea and the approaching army, the people panicked. "Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die?" They cried to Moses, but Moses stood firm. "Do not be afraid. Stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. ... The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still." Exodus 14:13-14. Then God commanded Moses to raise his staff over the sea. The waters parted. Walls of water stood on either side, and a dry path opened before them. Israel walked through the heart of the sea, every man, woman, and child stepping into freedom. When Pharaoh's army pursued, the waters crashed back into place. Chariots and horsemen were swept away, and not one survived. A song of redemption. On the other shore, safe and astonished, the people burst into song. "The Lord is my strength and my defense. He has become my salvation. The Lord is a warrior. The Lord is his name." Exodus 15:2-3. The Exodus was more than an escape. It was redemption, God buying his people out of slavery with power and blood. Themes woven through the Exodus story. 1. Redemption. The Passover lamb's blood marked Israel for life, prefiguring a greater redemption to come. In Christian theology, this points to Christ, the Lamb of God, whose blood brings ultimate deliverance from sin and death. 2. God's power. The plagues, the parting sea, the defeat of Pharaoh's army, each act revealed that no force, no empire, no god of Egypt could stand against the Lord. 3. Obedience. Israel's safety depended on listening and obeying God's instructions, painting the blood, eating in haste, stepping into the sea when the way opened. Obedience was the posture of faith. Conclusion: the God who delivers. The Exodus and Passover remain some of the most defining events in Scripture. For Israel, they became the foundation of identity, a God who hears, who saves, who redeems with outstretched arm. For later generations, they remain a testimony. The God who parts seas is the same God who calls us to trust him. The God who demands obedience is the same God who provides salvation. And the God who redeems from slavery is the same God who leads his people into freedom, then and now. The 10 Commandments. God's covenant at Sinai. From a mountain of fire to a people set apart, the desert wind howled around the base of Mount Sinai. But it was not the wind that made Israel tremble. The mountain itself was shrouded in thick smoke, trembling under the weight of fire and thunder. Lightning cracked across the sky, and the sound of a trumpet grew louder and louder until the people could hardly bear it. They had come far from Egypt, delivered by plagues, spared by the blood of the Passover lamb, and led by God through the Red Sea. Now, at Sinai, they would receive something greater than deliverance. They would receive a covenant. God was not simply rescuing slaves. He was shaping a holy nation. The voice from the fire. At the mountain summit, Moses ascended into the storm. There, God gave words that would echo across centuries, the 10 Commandments. They began not with rules, but with relationship. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. Exodus 20:2. Obedience was rooted in identity. They belonged to a God who had already redeemed them. The 10 words of the covenant. No other gods. Israel was to worship the Lord alone. No idols. God could not be reduced to images of wood or stone. Do not misuse God's name. His name was holy, not to be treated lightly. Keep the Sabbath day holy, a rhythm of rest to remember the Creator and Redeemer. Honor your father and mother. Family was the foundation of covenant life. Do not murder. Life belonged to God. Do not commit adultery. Covenant faithfulness extended to marriage. Do not steal. Respect for others' property and livelihood. Do not bear false witness. Truth was essential for justice and community. Do not covet. Even desires were brought under God's holiness. These were not arbitrary laws. They were the heartbeat of covenant living, a way of life marked by loyalty to God and love for neighbor, the people's fear in God's holiness. When the people heard the voice of God, they trembled. Do not have God speak to us directly, or we will die. They begged Moses. Moses reassured them. Do not be afraid. God has come to test you, so that the fear of God will be with you to keep you from sinning. Exodus 20:20, the holiness of God was overwhelming, but it was also protective, meant to shape a people who reflected his character. Themes woven through Sinai. 1. Covenant. The 10 Commandments were not a list of distant decrees, but a covenant agreement. Israel was entering into a binding relationship with the living God, much like a marriage vow, exclusive, loyal, enduring. 2. Holiness. God's presence on Sinai was fiery, untouchable, awe-inspiring. His law reflected that holiness, calling his people to be set apart from the nations. 3. Moral living. The commandments reached beyond rituals to touch the core of human life worship. Family, justice, truth, and even inward desires. They framed what it meant to live well in community and in relationship with God. Conclusion. The mountain and the covenant. The giving of the 10 Commandments at Mount Sinai was more than the delivery of a moral code. It was the birth of a covenant people. Israel, once slaves, were now bound to the Lord as his treasured possession, called to reflect his holiness in every aspect of life. From that day on, the 10 words became a foundation not only for Israel as law, but for countless generations seeking to understand what it means to walk with God. The mountain still speaks. Holiness matters. Covenant shapes identity. And moral living flows from belonging to a redeeming God.